In the streets of Verona, Italy, a fight breaks out between two noble families, the Montagues and the Capulets. As Prince Aeschylus, the ruler of Verona, breaks up the fight, he declares that the next person to provoke a conflict between the families will be put to death. After the fight, Romeo, son of Montague, tells his cousin Benvolio that he is in love with a woman that does not love him back. Benvolio tells Romeo to get over this woman and find another lover. At the same time, a nobleman named Paris asks Lord Capulet for his permission to marry his daughter Juliet. Capulet tells Paris that Juliet is too young for marriage, she is not yet 14, but that Paris may court her. Capulet then decides to throw a feast so that Paris and Juliet may get to know each other better. Romeo and Benvolio run into the Capulet servant inviting guests to the feast and decide they will also attend. Before the Capulet feast begins, Lady Capulet asks Juliet what she thinks of marriage. Juliet is shocked by this question, but her mother tells her that she must begin to consider marriage because Count Paris has expressed that he intends to marry her. Juliet remorsefully agrees to see if she will be able to love Paris at the upcoming feast. Romeo, Benvolio, and their friend Mercutio begin walking to the Capulet feast. They are all wearing masks so as to not be recognized as Montagues. As they walk, Mercutio begins to make fun of Romeo for sulking about his unrequited love. He then gives his famous Queen Mab speech about the fairy that visits people's dreams. Eventually, Mercutio begins to fervently rant, and Romeo must calm him down. When the Montagues arrive at the feast, Romeo sees Juliet from across the room and instantly falls in love with her. Meanwhile, Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, sees Romeo and becomes enraged that a Montague has dared to attend the Capulet feast. Romeo and Juliet kiss before Juliet is called away to speak with her mother. Later, Juliet's nurse informs her that she is in love with a Montague. After the feast, Romeo escapes Benvolio and Mercutio to find Juliet again. Eventually, Juliet emerges from her bedroom balcony, and she and Romeo talk for a while. At the end of their conversation, they profess their love for one another, and they promise to get married the following day. Romeo leaves in search of Friar Lawrence. Romeo visits Friar Lawrence, who agrees to marry the couple. Meanwhile, Mercutio and Benvolio discuss Tybalt's letter challenging Romeo to a duel. Juliet's nurse then visits Romeo to confirm that the couple will be married that day. Romeo tells the nurse to tell Juliet to attend confession at Friar Lawrence's cell that afternoon, where the two will be married. The nurse returns to tell Juliet that Romeo will be waiting in Friar Lawrence's cell to marry her that afternoon. The nurse then waits for Romeo's servant to bring her a ladder for Romeo to use to climb into Juliet's bedroom that night so that the two may consummate their marriage. That afternoon, Friar Lawrence marries Romeo and Juliet. Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio encounter Tybalt and his men after the marriage. Tybalt provokes Romeo, but since Romeo has married Juliet, he is not fazed by Tybalt's taunts. Mercutio becomes angered by Romeo's unwillingness to fight and draws his sword. Tybalt ultimately kills Mercutio, and Romeo, to avenge his friend's death, kills Tybalt. Prince Aeschylus enters and exiles Romeo from Verona. In the Capulet house, Juliet longs for Romeo to spend the night with her. The nurse then enters and tells Juliet that Romeo has killed Tybalt and been exiled from Verona. Juliet exclaims that Romeo's exile is far worse than the death of her cousin. The nurse then promises Juliet that she will find Romeo and the two will get to spend their wedding night together. Meanwhile, Romeo has fled to Friar Lawrence's cell in grief. Friar Lawrence tells him that he is lucky. He has only been exiled, not sentenced to death. The nurse enters and Romeo immediately asks about Juliet. Friar Lawrence then devises a plan so that Romeo may spend the night with Juliet, but must leave Verona before sunrise and flee to the neighboring town of Mantua. At the Capulet house, Capulet, Lady Capulet, and Paris discuss Juliet's feelings toward Paris. Lady Capulet says that she will know Juliet's feelings by the morning, but Capulet tells Paris that he and Juliet will be married the following Wednesday. He then decides that this is not enough time to prepare, and instead tells Paris that he will be married Thursday. After they spend the night together, Romeo escapes from Juliet's bedroom window. Lady Capulet then enters Juliet's room and tells her that she will marry Count Paris the following Thursday. Juliet refuses, but Capulet tells her that he will disown Juliet if she does not marry Count Paris. After he and Lady Capulet leave, the nurse tells Juliet that Romeo is basically dead and that she should marry Count Paris. Juliet visits Friar Lawrence to ask for advice regarding her upcoming marriage to Paris. Friar Lawrence gives Juliet a potion that will cause her to fall asleep for days, but everyone will think that she is dead. She will be buried in the Capulet tomb, and when she awakens, Romeo will be there to run away with her. Juliet then returns home with the potion and tells her parents that she has agreed to marry Count Paris. That night, Juliet asks the nurse and Lady Capulet if she can spend the night by herself. She holds the potion in her hands and contemplates drinking it. She is afraid of what might happen. She then has a vision of Tybalt's ghost searching for Romeo. She begs Tybalt's ghost to stop its search, and then she drinks the potion and immediately falls asleep. The next morning, the nurse goes to Juliet's room to wake her for her wedding day, only to find that Juliet is dead. Paris joins Capulet and Lady Capulet in mourning Juliet's death, but Friar Lawrence reminds them that Juliet is in a better place now and urges them to prepare for her funeral. Since the wedding will no longer be taking place, the musicians begin to pack up their things. A Capulet servant named Peter asks the musicians to play something happy to ease his grieving heart. The musicians refuse because this would be inappropriate and insulting to the Capulets. After insulting the musicians, Peter leaves sorrowfully. Romeo's servant in Mantua informs him that Juliet is dead. Romeo is overcome by grief, but asks if Friar Lawrence has sent him any letters. When his servant says no, he tells him to get him a horse so that he may return to Verona to lie with Juliet. On his way, he stops at an apothecary to buy some poison. He then says that he will go to Juliet's tomb to kill himself. Friar Lawrence speaks with Friar John, who he had earlier sent to deliver a letter to Romeo regarding Juliet's fake death. Friar John says he never made it to Romeo because he was locked in a quarantine house due to an outbreak of the plague. Friar Lawrence then becomes distraught as he realizes that no one will be in the tomb to rescue Juliet when she awakens. At the Capulet tomb that night, Paris goes to pay his respects to Juliet. Romeo arrives and he and Paris get into a fight. Romeo ultimately kills Paris. Romeo enters the tomb and finds Juliet's body. He lays down next to her and drinks the poison. Friar Lawrence enters just as Juliet awakens to discover Romeo's dead body. She then takes Romeo's dagger and stabs herself.